It's been teased for years. This thing that was rumored to be but never was. And then less than a year ago, Nintendo finally announced it and then later released it. It was a long road to Dread, but it was finally here, and it was worth the wait. Metroid Dread, the often teased, often rumored follow-up to the Game Boy Advance classic Metroid Fusion, finally came to fruition in 2021 for Nintendo Switch, courtesy of Mercury Steam, perhaps best known for their Lords of Shadows take on the Castlevania franchise, but also responsible for the 3DS remake of Metroid 2 dubbed Metroid Samus Returns, a game I never got to play much of, but I thought was alright from the few bits that I played. And some of the stuff introduced in that game would find its way over to Metroid Dread, so you could use stuff like melee counters and that sweet 360 aiming on a console with a proper analog stick. And thank fuck for that. So if you've played Samus Returns, you already have some idea as to how Dread handles, and if not, the game will be more than happy to guide you through the initial baby steps. And yes, you do control Samus with the stick and not the D-pad, which is reserved for mapping features and such. This took a bit of an adjustment, but it does work, and it's especially beneficial to that whole 360 aiming thing, which is crucial in a game like Dread. Honestly, if there's one thing I'm going to say right off the bat, it's to suggest that you take the time to learn the controls in Metroid Dread, because every button, every stick, trigger, and button on your Joy-Con / Pro Controller / whatever sees some use, especially as your arsenal of moves expands further into the game. The stick moves Samus, the D-pad controls the map and other things. The triggers are reserved for 360 aiming, missile and grapple beam activation and other things. Even pushing down the analog sticks enables the speed booster and phantom cloak abilities respectively once you do get them. That's not even taking into account things that require you to press a button while holding a bumper down. You've got a whole bunch of doohickeys on that controller, and all of them sees some use. At first glance, it sounds like a lot to take in. And it is. And this is one of the few times where I don't mind the much reviled tutorial trope to refresh my memory on these things after long pauses between sessions, especially since the art of the instruction manual that I can go to and quickly reference is a thing of the past. Once you get a feel for the controls and how everything works, things start to look up. And Control works extremely well. It's smooth, it's responsive with little to no lag. Moving Samus with the stick feels almost natural after a while, and the more precise aiming makes a world of difference. Sometimes I do find myself fumbling with the triggers and bumpers, pressing the wrong button to activate the wrong thing at the wrong time. Like I said, there's a lot to take in, and the quicker you adapt to the controls, the better off you'll be. But at no point am I going to accuse Control in Dread to be broken or unresponsive, because neither of those are the case here. Now that we got that piece of business out of the way, let's dive a bit deeper into Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread gives you 3 different save slots, allowing you to save up to 3 different games. This might not seem like a big deal, but in an age where most games won't even allow you this common courtesy, this alone is cause for celebration. And then the game begins with an opening cutscene and
You'll soon be entering ZTR's atmosphere.
Since when did I get a robot voice in my suit? Did the parasites kill my vocal cords or something? Okay, never mind. They just made me forget how to speak English.
And that is the last time we'll be hearing fake Samus for a good long while. Maybe if we get the Prime in about 5 years or so. Metroid Dread takes our main protagonist, famed bounty hunter and exploder of planets, Samus Aran, to distant planet ZDR to investigate missing Emmy robots, only to get attacked by a mysterious Chozo fellow who is mysterious and stuff. This quick scene also helpfully explains how Samus loses all her gear, something they've done a couple times in a couple other games before, the Prime stuff I think. Samus does have a nifty slide useful for slipping through narrow spaces quickly, but a morph ball would be far more useful, and that's still quite a ways to go. And so Samus has to navigate this planet's underground labyrinth and try to get back to her ship on the surface, surprised nobody's bothered to blow the thing up while she's stuck here, while also exploring the depths for power-ups, weapons, and other abilities that she needs to eventually regain. It's the standard 2D Metroid adventure, a somewhat open-ended adventure where you basically follow along a given path, but on occasion there are branching paths that could lead to additional things that could be of use to you in the long run. Gaining more abilities not only increases your chances of survival, but also opens up more of the world around you, since you could use your newfound abilities to open up paths previously closed off to you. However, while most of the game is focused on the traditional exploration and killing of space aliens, there's the other part that's focused on the dread, if you will, which reside in these security zones you'll come across. Those enemies that have gone missing and you're supposed to be looking out for, you'll be seeing them quite a bit, and they're out for your blood. Imagine the ASX from Metroid Fusion, but even more tenacious and harder to evade. At first your weapons can't hurt them, and your options are to either outrun them or escape their grasp. Or they eventually catch you and it's game over. You can escape their clutches, but the timing is strict as all hell, but if you manage to escape their grasp, they'll be disabled momentarily, allowing you to escape. Eventually, you'll come across a security system that you'll have to defeat in order to be equipped with a temporary Omega Blaster, the only weapon capable of defeating an enemy. Even this doesn't come easy, and those enemies just keep coming at you even as you're piercing away at its outer shell, which does regenerate after a period of time if you don't keep the stream of fire going. With time, patience, and perhaps a bit of luck, the enemy goes down and another ability is added to your arsenal. 7 enemy reside on the planet, each one more lethal than the last, but each one defeated, bringing you closer to the end game, assuming you even make it there, that is. Much like in Fusion, you'll be guided by your ship's computer from navigational rooms who also sound like a robot and will tell you what to do in order to progress onwards. These briefings are then stored in a running log that keeps track of your progress, as well as any tutorials that you may wish to revisit in order to refresh your memory on things. It's a handy feature to have for those long hiatuses between sessions and you need to remind yourself of what you need to do or where you need to go. Yes, there is a general linearity to Dread in how you're supposed to proceed, but there is always room for deviation from the given path in order to come across additional stock, and as always, the more abilities you gain, the more open your paths are to new locations. Metroid Dread has been referred to as the final chapter of sorts of the current Metroid story, or something to that extent. And if that is truly the case, then it only makes sense that it serves as a culmination of sorts of everything that has come before. Feels like there's some aspect from previous games brought back to the fold in Dread. Hunting down enemies akin to hunting down Metroids in Metroid 2, being chased by those same enemies akin to ASX's in Fusion, melee counters from Samus Return, which in turn resemble mini QuickTime events from that other M game but more tolerable somewhat, and in the moment compared to whatever. Grappling Beam first debuted at Super Metroid, and its applications have expanded to pulling locks and blocks, which is actually quite nice and makes me wish another franchise with a long flail type weapon had similar applications instead of whatever. Collecting unknown resources similar to collecting unknown items in Zero Mission, except the unknown resources are power bombs, but you don't know how to use power bombs, and actually I always found that kind of stupid, but whatever. This is the Metroid formula refined to perhaps its finest form in terms of gameplay and mechanics, and while the controls do take some time to learn and properly memorize, they eventually work naturally, and they do feel really smooth as a whole. A lot of Dread is based on memorization, particularly in regards to bosses, learning the patterns, when to strike, when to counter, things of that nature, knowing which teleporters lead to where. Knowing how to avoid triggering security locks, whether it be using phantom cloaks or flash shifting dashes to evade said triggers. Knowing key escape routes in order to avoid those enemies and keep out of sight in general. Remembering where recharge stations are to restore your stock, because save points and Chozo statues will not be doing that for you, because they're the old school save points and Chozo statues. They save your game and hold your shit respectively. Fuck off with all that extra noise, you are on your own. Power-ups are familiar fare for the most part, the usual standbys and series staples. There's some new toys to play with, here and there. Enemies generally hit harder than before. Things get a little more hectic at times. Dread is generally a more demanding game than its predecessors, but no less satisfying. I mentioned in the previous video that I always felt Metroid was more of a journey with a sense of wonder and discovery that holds true especially with Dread. Whether it's seeing things happen or manipulating things with switches and such to control part of the environment, or just enjoying the scenery you explore, which looks absolutely splendid on here. You have a variety of locales to travel through, your usual lava caverns, undergrounds, and occasional forestry segments, but eventually you'll come across some temple and abandoned cityscapes of sorts. These all look really, really good, particularly the bits with the rain and the raging waters below. That's just wonderful to look at for relatively low-tech stuff. I mean, clearly Metroid Dread is a fine-looking game that makes use of the 2.5D style that it adopts. Now, it's strictly a side-scroller, doesn't try to do anything fancy beyond that, and that's fine. And you have more than enough of a field view to get your bearings on things. The only time the third dimension sees use is during these cutscenes that play out every so often, which adds a bit of flair to the presentation, relatively non-intrusive, and skippable after the first time it plays. But I do like the way this game looks, shrouded mostly in darkness, feeling somewhat desolate at times. Quite a bit of variety in the scenery and the creature designs as well, and the game does run pretty smoothly even under the most stressful moments, with slowdown and frame skipping on the extremely lower end of things. One complaint I do have, however, the load times during elevators and teleporter rides, they're a bit on the longish side, and I'm playing the card version, so maybe the download version works a little faster, I guess. I don't know. I really don't care either way. The audio aspect of Dread is fascinating. This robot voice they have for Samus when she speaks English.
Uploading data.
I'm guessing this is payback for everyone shitting on other M Samus for having such a dry read. Anyway, there are story bits here and there, but they're mostly relegated to these briefings whenever you enter a new nav room, which doubles as a save point. There's only a couple extended cutscenes involving dialogue with other characters, mostly done in alien languages. The rest are just quick bits to set up the next segment or boss fight you'll have to tackle. As for the rest of it, the game's soundtrack is mostly brand new. There's a couple nods to past themes here and there, but it's mostly a mix of new melodic and ambient tunes, with some occasional dramatic pieces that largely fit with the worlds you explore or the situations that you'll find yourself in. I find a lot of orchestral soundtracks in these modern video games to be the equivalent of wallpaper music. It's something that complements the game, but nothing that really sticks to mind afterwards. And I think that's a fair summation of Dread's soundtrack. Now, the sound effects are the usual stock sounds of laser blast, explosion, creature sounds, things of that nature. They sound nice and crisp for the most part. Not much I'm gonna say there. You know, it works. The road to Dread has been long and arduous, but we eventually made it, and on a whole, it was indeed worth the wait. Metroid Dread is a fine game, a superb game, an excellent game as it were. Had this been done a year ago when it first came out, I would have gone so far to say it may very well be the best Metroid game ever made, and it'd be a fair comment to make. But almost a year later, I sat on the game, and you know what? I don't know if I'd go that far. Both this and Super Metroid are practically neck and neck for that crown, and sometimes Super Metroid comes across as the more accessible option. Fewer buttons to memorize generally. But one thing I could say about Dread is that it is the first Metroid worthy of following in Super's footsteps. No disrespect to Fusion or Zero Mission, those are fine games, but they're fine games on a limited platform, and Samus Returns, kind of the same deal. But Metroid Dread is Metroid in its fully realized form. All the lessons learned from previous endeavors are applied here in some form or fashion, and serves not only as a fresh take on a classic theme, but also a new challenging adventure that dares players to try new things and not rest on their laurels, for doing the latter will undo you rather quickly and rather painfully. Metroid Dread is a satisfying conclusion to a long, long journey, and definitely a game of its ilk that is well worth checking out.
There's no next mission. I'm going to bed. Good night.